We continue to take a look at the race for Texas 19. Early voting just a few days away now on Tuesday, the first day of early voting, and this race, a very important race, obviously, for this area. And joining me in studio to discuss this campaign, Jodey Arrington back with us. Welcome back.
It's good to be back, Chad, and it's hard to believe that early voting is going to start next week.
Yeah, it's just a few days away. Are you still hearing from folks who are undecided in this race? It seems like there are still a lot of people who are on the fence which way to go on this race.
Yeah, I think there are, actually. I think there are. And, we're trying to bring them over on our side every day, whether we're knocking on doors or having these forums, where lots of folks gather. We had a huge turnout in Snyder, by the way. I think there were more people in Snyder than every forum combined, but standing room only. But, I think there are undecided voters, and that's why I think all the candidates are going to be hitting the streets every day between now and March 1st.
More and more of the candidates who have come on this show are touting leadership and giving examples of leadership. I know you've talked about some of the things that you've done, and I've had listeners who have responded and go, okay, give me specifics, more specifics. How have you led? So tell our listeners how you have examples of leadership.
Well, let's start with the federal government, because that's where we're all asking folks to send us to do a job. One of the biggest challenges right now is just this explosion of government. And as I say on the campaign trail, it is crushing our economy. It is compromising our freedoms, and it's quenching the American spirit and drive. When I was chief of staff at the FDIC with Chairman Don Powell, who's a West Texas community banker from Amarillo, we cut the bureaucracy. That is, we reduced the workforce by almost 25%. It was huge. I mean, if you think about doing that across the entire federal government, we need to do that. And so we did it. We had to deal with unions. We had to deal with lawsuits. I mean, it's not easy to do, but we did it because it was the right thing. Mm-hmm. We just thought that's what Republicans were supposed to do, treat it like it's your own money and run it like it's your own business. That resulted in $80 million in reduction in spending, and then we led a regulatory burden relief initiative with all the banking agencies, the Federal Reserve, the Comptroller of Currency, et cetera. We raised, for example, the threshold on assets that would define one as a small bank, because small banks have a different regulatory construct. The one-size-fits-all regulatory regime is terrible for small businesses, no exception with community banks. We streamlined call report data and made it electronic interface, real time, so that was part of the reg burden reduction. We also had we made our exams risk-based. So if you ran a good bank, we weren't going to be all up in your business. We were going to spend less time, and we were going to streamline that process. So I think we did a lot of things to reduce regulatory burden. And then we helped pass deposit insurance reform, which combined the savings and the banking fund. This is the insurance fund, billions of dollars. It's the backstop for bank failures, and we strengthened that fund by combining them. It was long overdue, we also had premiums that were now risk based. But before it was just an arbitrary deal. Everybody had a tax on them or a premium that banks paid, regardless of your performance. So we changed the law so that if you were performing, we wouldn't. Your premium would go down, and if you were not, then your premium goes up. That's a market-based solution. So I don't know if that's specific enough, but that's what I did at the federal government level, and then we could talk about Texas Tech, but I'll stop there.
Visiting with Jodey Arrington, candidate for Texas 19. Let's talk about the FDIC a little bit, and also banking, because you received the endorsement of the, I think I'm getting this name right, Independent Bankers Association. You received their endorsement.
Yeah.
Let's look back with the bailout. Did you think the bailout was a good idea? And if elected, God forbid we have another collapse. But you look at what's going on with the economy right now. It's possible that we could get into another big time recession. If there is another attempt at bailing out the banks, bailing out Wall Street, bailing out other businesses, and other corporations. Where would you vote on that?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't have bailed them out. We should have had the market. That creates moral hazard. Banking policy leaders and economists are always talking about moral hazard when you forgive student loans altogether, or when you let these big banks. And by the way, these weren't the small banks. That's Dodd-Frank, which was supposed to cure all that ailed the banking system, was really directed at the big banks. But again, this is the problem with Washington. It's just got this one-size-fits-all, and the community banks weren't a part of that. It was folks holding, all these bundled subprime mortgages on their balance sheet, and that they failed on account of bad business, and they should have absorbed that pain. And I know the workout would have been longer on our economy. I understand that, and I understand the other side of systemic risk. But I think moral hazard and having repeat the same mistakes is far greater in the long term than short term systemic risk. So I think they made the wrong decision, and so I would have made, if I were king, I would have made a different call on that.
Is there any part where the government should step in and say, okay, we're going to bail out a certain sector?
I can't imagine. Certainly if there was tremendous national security implications, I think that would be the one thing that if that just made America vulnerable and weak and susceptible to attacks, and put us in a national security bind, I think I would consider that. But that wasn't the case with the banking crisis.
We'll get to the phones here in just a second with your questions for Jodey Arrington. But before the break, I want to get a question that was asked at the forum in Abilene is this Lubbock versus Abilene? And when we had one of another candidate in, they said, we're not really hearing that on the trail, but we're hearing that from the moderators out there. Are you hearing it on the trail, or are you hearing that where it's Lubbock versus Abilene?
Not at all on the trail. I have heard it from the Abilene, moderators, I guess. And my response was simply that I don't see this as an Abilene versus Lubbock or a Seminole versus Stanford, east-west, 29 counties. And I mentioned that we were one West Texas, and that we better operate that way, because I guarantee you, when the energy sector is sucking wind, it hurts both Abilene and Lubbock. If the cotton farmers go away because on account of our terrible trade policies and farm bill, then that's going to hurt everybody out here. All 29 counties will suffer. Lubbock and Abilene, the population centers, will suffer. So I said, look, we are one West Texas. We are bound by our West Texas values: family, faith, hard work, independence, and we're bound by our way of life. And we are energy. We are ag. We are the food, fuel, and fiber for the country. And that's impressive, what we do, but it's obviously not impressive enough on our nation's leaders, because they're not doing enough to support this critical production of either fuel, food, or fiber. And that's why, as I've said before, we've got to have a champion. We got to tell our story, and we got to build the coalitions of support that we need. But the story's great. We just need the voice.
When we come back, we'll we'll continue our visit with Jodey Arrington, candidate for Texas 19. Early voting starts on Tuesday. We'll also get your questions on the phones. If you have a question for Jodey Arrington, feel free to dial in 770-5790, toll free 1-800-687-0790. All right, Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 790 KFYO. We're visiting with the candidate for Texas 19, looking to replace Congressman Randy Naugabauer. Jodey Arrington in studio. If you have a question for Jodey Arrington, feel free to go ahead and give us a call. We'll try to get you on the air, 770-5790, toll-free, 1-800-687-0790. James has a question for Jodey Arrington. James, you're on with Jodey.
Good morning, Chad. How are you?
Doing well.
Awesome. Well, I've been following the District 19 race ever since it started. My dad's a local business owner, and he's friends with this guy who runs polls for a living. We're talking last night, and he was telling us about a poll done early on, I think before the race actually, that the mayor was up a few points above the rest of the field. But lately we were informed that there were 2 polls done, actually, one in the district and one locally. I think one was an auto-dial poll and one was a direct dial poll, and one of those had Arrington in the lead. My question to you, Mr. Arrington, what stock do you actually take in these polls, and why aren't they accessible publicly? And I thank you, Chad, for having me on, and I'll hang up and listen. Thank you.
James, thanks for that question. And I've heard about polls. I haven't seen any, but I've heard about them. And I don't know that I put a lot of stock in them, quite frankly. I mean, I'm glad to hear that there's a poll out there that has me leading, but I'm running every day like I tell people I'm running scared. I mean, that's how I've conducted my business. That's how I've led, always with a sense of urgency, never taking for granted that whether we're ahead or not, I play like I'm behind. So anyway, I don't know how much science there is to these polls, but it's encouraging to hear. But I get a sense, just being the candidate out and about in the 29 counties, that the momentum is behind us, and whether that's the Farm Bureau endorsement or the community bankers with the IBAT endorsement, or the fundraising, which I think is I think that's a sacred trust for somebody to, and a high vote of confidence when somebody writes you a check. So I think all indications are we've got a lot of momentum. So I'll leave it at that. But I think it's because we have a great message and we are separating ourselves. And the way we're doing that, for James and anybody that's still maybe undecided, is that, number one, I've got roots in West Texas. This is my home. I love this place. I want to fight for this place. I want to make sure my kids and your kids can grow up in a strong and prosperous West Texas. But the other deal is, with me, you get somebody who has a breadth of experience. I mean, I've held leadership roles in higher education as former vice chancellor. I'm president of a healthcare company, grew up in an ag community and an ag family. So those are drivers of our economy. And I think it's important to understand the challenges that face those key industries. And then lastly, but not least, I think you've got to have somebody with a track record of leadership. People ask me, Chad, even this morning at a coffee shop, a guy said, how do I know you're not going to go up there and get captured like everybody else? Well, this is what happens. This is why we're so suspect and so cynical. And I said, look, I was up there with George W. Bush, and I worked hard, and I left the place better than I found it, and reflective of our conservative values, and I came home. I didn't stay. I came home to raise my family. I could have stayed, made a lot of money. I came here to serve as my alma mater, my community, and raise my family here, so my kids could have the West Texas values instilled in them. So I think that's important. The roots here, my family, my mom and dad are still in Plainview. My brother's a community banker here. I'm very plugged into my church as a former elder. You got to come back, because you have to have somebody chew you out, bring you back down to earth, because everybody in Washington's telling you how great you are, how smart. You're going to be the next chairman of this. You're going to be the next president. I mean, it's kind of silly. But if you don't have that gravity bringing you back to this district, you're in trouble, and you are susceptible to Potomac fever and us losing one more good man to Washington.
I'm visiting with Jodey Arrington, candidate for Texas 19. When James had called, he had told our call screener that his question was, what sets you apart from the other candidates, which you got into there, I think, a little bit. But one of the things that you bring up is your roots here in West Texas. Other candidates have brought up, I'll say one of the other candidates from Abilene, that they're concerned that he doesn't have roots in this area, not being from this area. Is that a concern that people should have?
As I said, I think for me, the fact that I grew up here, the fact that I've so vested in this community, the fact that I chose to come back to raise my family, and the fact that I've got family that will still be here if elected, an alma mater that's here, where I may want to catch a couple of Texas Tech games. So there's just a reason for me to come back, and I think that's important for all the candidates, because There is a track record of politicians who go to Washington and lose their way, and nobody likes to get chewed out, but you need that. And I say chewed out, I mean they need to remind you that of the principles and values and positions that you committed to, that that they're counting on you to advance in Washington. So, but I've been there and I've advanced them. I came back here to live among the people and the laws that we passed, and I just want the opportunity to do it again.
I want you to speak to a criticism that I've heard about you from some voters out there, and that's been you've gone government job to government job to government job. And people are turned off by that. Mm-hmm. Are they wrong to be turned off from that? Is it bad to go from working for the Bush administration to Texas Tech? You have spent time at healthcare, and then you were running for office at that point. Now you're running for office again. Should people see that as a red flag of someone who just wants to get a government paycheck?
I think people. I don't think it's about being a politician or being in public service. I'm in the private sector now, so as president of a holding company that owns Grace Health System, and we're doing some really cool stuff with telemedicine. And but no, I think the question is, what did you do when you were in those positions? I mean, did you lead? Were you trustworthy? Were you responsive? Did you leave it better than you found it? I mean, Texas Tech was in decline for 3 years before Kent Hance and me and the team showed up, and I had a key role as chairman of the Enrollment Growth Task Force. We turned it around, added thousands of students. That's a lot of money to this economy. That's the growth of Texas Tech, whether it was doubling research or having doubled revenue for commercialization of technologies coming out of the tech R&D pipeline. Those things helped our economy. They helped our community. They strengthened it. And so I think the issue is, not what have you done. And by the way, it's a diverse portfolio of stuff that I've done. And again, now in the private sector and in the healthcare industry. So now the question is, not what you've been a part of in terms of your particular industry or sector of the economy, public service or private sector. What did you do? And I've led, I delivered results, and I made things better for West Texas, for our state, and for our country.
How long do you intend to serve? And are you for term limits?
Absolutely, I'm for term limits. And I would sign just about any piece of legislation that had, we've talked about 6 years, 8 years, 10 years. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, we need enough time to go up there and do the job. Mm-hmm. But we need to make sure that everybody's term limited, because I do think it hurts rural communities and districts like District 19. If you were to self-impose a term limit on your district or on your representative. So, but yeah, that's any of them are great with me, and would change the dynamic that is a part of the broken culture and dysfunction of Washington.
We have about a minute or so left here. Tell folks who are still looking at voting, still on the fence, what they need to know about you, Jodey Arrington.
Well, they need to know I can hit the ground running because of my relationships and my experience and my track record. And I think that's going to be important, because we're one of 435 votes. And if that's all you are, I think we've failed our district. We've got to have a strong leader, and we've got to have somebody that can be in a position to influence the outcome that will solve the national debt crisis, that will solve our national security crisis, that will solve our economic crisis, and that will put West Texas, ag, energy, et cetera, on strong footing so that we can prosper as a region.
Thank you very much.